Picture the highways of the 1970s. Thunderous engines, endless style, and speed that felt unstoppable. Then came new government restrictions, slamming the brakes on Detroit's wildest machines. Or so it seemed. The Trans Am found a back door, an overlooked loophole that turned the tables on the EPA Environmental Protection Agency, and kept muscle alive. Want to know how? Stick around and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Regal Rides for more legends of the road. The 1970s were a decade of contradiction in America. Just a few years earlier, the golden age of muscle cars had been in full swing. Cars like the GTO, Chevelle SS, Roadrunner, and Mustang ruled the streets, their massive V8 engines shaking the ground, their exhaust notes echoing like anthems of rebellion. Young men and women lined drag strips on Friday nights, magazines boasted quarter-mile times on every cover, and horsepower numbers climbed higher year after year. It felt like there was no ceiling, just an endless race toward more speed and more freedom. Then came the crash. The first oil crisis in 1973 hit like a thunderclap. Overnight, gas stations posted shocking new prices, and suddenly those big block beasts looked less like heroes and more like hungry monsters draining wallets dry. For many Americans, practicality began to win out over passion. At the same time, the newly formed Environmental Protection Agency, armed with strict emissions standards, stepped in to tame what they saw as an industry running wild. Compression ratios were slashed, catalytic converters were installed, and engines that once roared were suddenly coughing through miles of vacuum hoses. Car enthusiasts, especially the young generation who had grown up idolizing Detroit iron, felt betrayed. They asked, where did all the speed go? Horsepower ratings once printed proudly in bold numbers tumbled. Cars that once stormed quarter miles with ease now struggled to feel alive. For many, the dream was over. The muscle car was dead. But Pontiac refused to surrender. Deep within its engineering and marketing departments, there was still a belief that the spirit of speed couldn't be regulated out of existence. The team knew there had to be another way, a crack in the wall of rules, a way to keep the fire burning without setting off alarms. The stage was set for something daring, something rebellious, something that would rewrite the rules of survival. And out of that determination came the Trans Am, a car that would prove that cleverness could be just as powerful as raw displacement. By the late 1960s, Pontiac had already cemented its reputation as a leader in performance. The GTO had exploded onto the scene, igniting what many called the muscle car revolution. But competition was everywhere. Chevrolet had the Camaro, Ford was selling Mustangs by the truckload, and Dodge and Plymouth were building wild machines with names like Challenger and Roadrunner. Pontiac needed to push further, to make a statement that couldn't be ignored. That answer came in 1969 with the debut of the Firebird Trans Am. Named after the famous Trans-American racing series, the car wasn't just another variant, it was a bold declaration of attitude. Its aggressive body lines, spoilers, and later, the now iconic screaming chicken hood decal made it impossible to mistake for anything else. This wasn't a car built to blend in, it was built to stand out, to look fast even when standing still. But beneath the show-stopping looks was an even bigger challenge. The early 1970s brought with them a new reality. Horsepower ratings were dropping, emissions testing was tightening, and automakers were being forced to neuter the very cars that had defined their brand identities. For Pontiac, this was more than a design problem, it was survival. How could they keep the Trans Am alive when the government seemed determined to strip its soul away? The answer lay in how those very rules were written. The EPA's testing methods didn't apply equally to every engine variation, and Pontiac's engineers saw a gap, a loophole that could be exploited. By carefully managing how engines were certified on paper, Pontiac realized they could deliver far more performance in practice than the numbers suggested. And so the Trans Am wasn't just born out of engineering, it was born out of defiance. This was a car designed to bend the rules, to give drivers what they craved without waving a red flag to regulators. The legend of the Trans Am wasn't accidental. It was the product of determination, cleverness, and a refusal to bow down. To understand Pontiac's brilliance, you first have to understand how the EPA worked in the 1970s. Emissions regulations weren't as comprehensive as they are today. The government didn't test every single engine combination. Instead, they often tested a base engine for certification. As long as other engines were technically in the same family, they could slip through with far less scrutiny. Pontiac spotted this weakness and turned it into an art form. On paper, the Trans Am came with modest V8 options that looked tame enough to pass. But for those who knew where to look and who checked the right boxes on the order form, the real story began. Pontiac quietly offered larger, more potent engines, like the 400 cubic inch V8 and the legendary 455 cubic inch Mills. These power plants weren't tested with the same intensity, meaning they often escaped the strictest limitations. The result? A car that on paper looked compliant and unthreatening, but in reality roared with the fury of Detroit's golden years. It was a loophole so audacious that it almost felt like magic. Regulators saw numbers that reassured them, but buyers felt the truth the moment they pressed the accelerator and were pinned back in their seats. For enthusiasts, this was nothing short of a miracle. In a decade when many cars felt muted and joyless, the Trans Am still had bite. It still carried that rebellious edge. And it was proof that cleverness and passion could outsmart bureaucracy. Was it genius engineering or just clever paperwork? The truth is, it was both. And it kept the flame of muscle alive when everyone else was watching it die. On paper, the 1970s Trans Am didn't look extraordinary. Official horsepower ratings often hovered around 250 to 310, numbers that paled compared to the late 60s monsters. But paper lied. Out on the streets and drag strips, these cars were running quarter miles in times that embarrassed rivals. The real-world performance was far stronger than the EPA-friendly numbers suggested. At the heart of this deception were Pontiac's big engines. The 400 cubic inch V8 was a solid performer, but the legends were the 455 high output and especially the 455 Super Duty. The SD455, produced in limited numbers, became a holy grail among collectors. It was a race-bred engine disguised as a street machine, delivering torque so immense that it felt like it could twist the earth beneath its tires. But it wasn't just about raw speed. The Trans Am was built to make a statement. Its aggressive lines, shaker hood scoops, and thunderous exhaust note reminded everyone that Detroit still had a heartbeat. Driving one wasn't just transportation, it was an act of rebellion, a declaration that you weren't ready to give up on freedom, fun, and fire-breathing performance. The Trans Am was the wolf in sheep's clothing, a car that appeared on the surface to play by the rules but broke them gloriously once unleashed. If Pontiac's loophole gave the Trans Am its bite, Hollywood gave it immortality. In 1977, Smokey and the Bandit hit theaters, and the Trans Am was suddenly everywhere. The black and gold car, with its giant bird decal, didn't just play a supporting role, it stole the spotlight. Burt Reynolds, with his mustache and cowboy hat, made the car a cultural icon, the ultimate symbol of cool. The movie tapped into something Americans craved: rebellion, fun, and escape. Watching the Bandit outdrive cops, outsmart authority, and tear across the South with style made audiences cheer. The Trans Am wasn't just a car on screen, it was the embodiment of freedom at a time when life felt increasingly restricted by rules, fuel prices, and regulation. For many, seeing the Trans Am fly across that silver screen was unforgettable. Posters went up in bedrooms. Kids dreamed of someday owning one. Sales exploded. Pontiac couldn't have planned it better. In that moment, the Trans Am wasn't just Detroit muscle, it was an American hero. Looking back, it almost feels mythical. Pontiac's ability to dance around EPA rules turned the Trans Am into more than a car. It became a legend of ingenuity, rebellion, and American spirit. While so many other nameplates faded into mediocrity during the 1970s, the Trans Am carried the flame forward. Today, collectors prize these cars not just for their performance, but for their story. A 455 Super Duty, with its rarity and raw power, is now one of the most sought-after muscle cars ever built. Even the lesser Trans Ams command attention, because they represent a time when automakers fought back. Owning one isn't just about nostalgia, it's about honoring the last stand of Detroit's golden era. Modern cars may be quicker, smoother, and packed with technology, but few can match the raw soul of a Trans Am from the 70s. When you fire one up and hear that growl, it's not just an engine starting, it's history refusing to die, and that's the true legacy, proof that legends never fade. The Trans Am wasn't just a car, it was a rebellion on four wheels. Born from loopholes, fueled by passion, and immortalized by Hollywood, it became the outlaw hero of a generation. At a time when regulators tried to silence Detroit's thunder, Pontiac found a way to keep the roar alive. But here's the question, could today's cars ever capture that same spirit of freedom? Tell us what you think in the comments, and if this journey into the golden age stirred your soul, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Regal Rides, where automotive legends never die.